My mom tried to trap me in my own house, so I left her at the airport with nothing. I'm writing this at 2 in the morning because I can't sleep, and I keep replaying that moment in my head. The look on her face when I put the car in drive, the silence that filled the space where her voice used to be, the way my hands shook on the steering wheel for the entire drive home, my knuckles white against the black leather, my jaw clenched so tight I'd have a headache for 2 days afterward. My daughter asking me why Grandma looked so mad, her little voice confused and worried from the back seat, and me not knowing how to answer her because I wasn't sure if what I'd just done made me strong or made me a monster. Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe it doesn't matter what it made me, only that I finally did it. This still sits heavy in my chest, even now, months later. Some weights don't lift just because you did the right thing. Growing up with my mom wasn't just hard, it was unsafe. I don't talk about the specifics much because honestly, I spent 2 decades trying to drown those memories in whiskey and beer. And even now that I'm sober, some doors stay locked for a reason. But I'll say this, by the time I was 12 years old, things had gotten bad enough that someone called the authorities. Not my dad, who'd been out of the picture in terms of custody since I was 6. Not a teacher, though I'm sure they noticed things. A neighbor, I think. Maybe a friend's parent who'd seen too much during a sleepover. I never found out who, and part of me is grateful for that, because I never had to carry the weight of thanking them or resenting them for what came next. The Child Protective Services got involved, and suddenly there were court dates and lawyers and a judge who looked at me over her glasses and asked me questions I didn't know how to answer. Questions like, do you feel safe at home, and has anyone ever hurt you, that felt too big for my 12-year-old mouth to form answers to. I remember the social worker had kind eyes but kept clicking her pen over and over, this nervous habit that made me want to scream. I remember the fluorescent lights in the waiting room flickering, one of them dying slowly, buzzing like an angry wasp. The decision came down in the fall. I remember because the leaves were changing, and I kept staring out the courtroom window during the proceedings, watching them fall, thinking about how they looked so free even as they were dying. Well, the judge ruled that I would go live with my dad full-time. Primary custody, they called it. Like I was a thing to be held rather than a kid who just wanted to feel safe going to sleep at night. My mom sat 3 rows behind me, and I didn't turn around to look at her, but I could feel her staring at the back of my head, burning a hole there. That feeling never really went away, even years later. Even now, sometimes I feel eyes on the back of my head and I think it's her. The paperwork came through a few weeks later. Standard custody stuff, forms to transfer school records, medical information, vaccination records, that kind of thing. There was a line that asked for the name of the child being transferred. My dad showed me the documents years later, when I was in my 20s and trying to understand what had happened. Trying to piece together why I felt so fundamentally broken. In my mom's handwriting, in the space where my name should have been, she'd written, I have no son, not my name. Not even minor child or the child or something clinical and detached. Just that, a complete erasure. I have no son, like I'd never existed. Like 12 years of my life, of her raising me, of me calling her mom, had been erased with 5 words written in blue ballpoint pen. I didn't find out about that until I was 23, sitting in my dad's kitchen while he made coffee. But once I did, it never really left me. It lived in my chest like a stone, getting heavier every time I thought about it, pressing against my lungs until sometimes I couldn't quite catch my breath. I'd be at work or driving or lying in bed at night, and I'd remember those words, and I'd have to remind myself to breathe. After the custody change, I barely saw her. A little when I was 17, awkward dinners where we sat across from each other at chain restaurants with too bright lighting and pretended we were normal. We'd make small talk about school, about my friends she didn't know, about her job I didn't care about. She'd ask questions that felt like they came from a script for how mothers were supposed to talk to their sons. I'd answer in as few words as possible. The waitress would sense the tension and refill our water glasses more often than necessary, giving us something to do with our hands. Again in my early 20s, before I found out about the paperwork, I tried a few more times. Coffee meetups that lasted 20 minutes. A movie once where we sat in the dark and didn't have to look at each other. Yeah, then nothing solid for years. I'm almost 40 now, and for more than half my life, she's been mostly absent. A ghost who occasionally sent birthday cards with generic messages that could have been written to anyone. Hope your day is special. Wishing you all the best. Never anything personal. Never anything that showed she actually knew me, had raised me, had once held me as a baby, and promised to keep me safe. I spent over 20 years drinking myself numb. Started at 15, if I'm being honest. A beer here and there at first, at parties, the way teenagers do. But it became more than that. By 18, I was drinking alone. By 20, I needed it. By my mid-20s, I was the guy who always had a 6-pack in the fridge and a bottle of something stronger in the cabinet. Jim Beam usually. Sometimes Wild Turkey when I wanted to pretend I had taste. I was functional, mostly. Held down jobs, a string of them. Never quite finding my footing, but always landing on my feet. Paid my bills on time. Showed up where I needed to show up. But I was hollow, and I was filling that hollow space with anything that would make me forget the sound of her voice saying things I still can't repeat out loud. The drinking years blur together now, which I suppose is fitting since that's exactly what I was trying to do. I lost friends. I lost a girlfriend I'd loved, who left crying after finding me passed out on the bathroom floor at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I lost years, just entire years, that I remember only in fragments. A job in construction, an apartment with brown carpet, a car accident I walked away from that I shouldn't have. The moment I realized I couldn't remember my nephew's birthday or what my sister looked like when she smiled. When I finally got sober in 2018, it wasn't because I hit some dramatic rock bottom. I didn't wake up in a hospital or lose everything or get a DUI that made me see the light. It was because I woke up one morning in March, a Tuesday morning with weak sunlight coming through my blinds, and realized I'd been running from the same thing for 2 decades, and I was tired, so tired, bone tired, soul tired. I was tired of being afraid of my own thoughts. I was tired of needing something outside myself just to feel normal. I was tired of the person I saw in the mirror, this hollow-eyed stranger who looked like he was barely hanging on. So I went to a meeting. Just walked into a church basement on a Wednesday night where a sign said, meeting 7 p.m., and sat in a folding chair and listened to people tell stories that sounded like mine. I went back the next week, and the next. I got a sponsor, a guy named Marcus who'd been sober 15 years and had kind eyes and didn't take any of my bullshit. I did the work, the steps, the inventory, the amends. I looked at the wreckage of my relationships and decided what I wanted to salvage, what I could salvage, what was too broken to ever be fixed. And part of that work, the hardest part, was looking at my relationship with my mom and deciding if there was anything there worth saving. I decided I wanted to try again with her. I reached out in the spring of 2019. Just a text at first. I had my thumb hovering over the send button for 10 minutes before I finally pressed it.
Hey, it's me. I've been thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay.
She responded 3 days later with a thumbs up emoji and thanks, not thank you, not I've been thinking about you too, just thanks. But it was something. We started slow, a few texts here and there, then a phone call that lasted 7 minutes and felt like 7 hours, then another call, longer this time, where we talked about the weather and traffic and nothing important at all, but we were talking. It was messy and awkward and neither of us really knew how to talk to each other, but we were trying. She was already close to 70 by then. Her hair had gone completely white, which shocked me the first time I saw a recent photo. The woman I remembered had dark hair. It always dyed too dark, almost black. Now she looked like someone's grandmother, which I suppose she was. My daughter's grandmother, though they'd barely met. Her voice had this raspy quality from years of smoking, Marlboro Reds, a habit she'd had since before I was born, and apparently had no intention of quitting. She had no contact with 2 of her 3 kids, my older sisters, and from what I understood through the family grapevine, that was by her choice as much as theirs. They'd tried, they'd failed, they'd given up. I was the one still trying. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her if she had ever thought about the way she treated me growing up, if she ever looked back and saw what I saw, if she ever felt any regret or remorse or even just acknowledgement that things had been bad, she didn't hesitate. We were on the phone. Yes, I was pacing my kitchen, my heart pounding, having rehearsed this question in therapy for weeks. You're an adult, she said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact, like I'd just asked her opinion on the weather. You need to let it go already. That was the moment I understood how this was going to work. If there was going to be forgiveness, it would only come from me. She wasn't carrying any of it. She'd put it down years ago and walked away, and she didn't understand why I kept picking it up and turning it over in my hands, examining it from every angle, trying to make sense of it. To her, the past was the past, done, irrelevant. My pain was an inconvenience, a weight I was choosing to carry when I should just set it down and move on. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Ye Chen, who wore sensible shoes and had a calm presence that made me feel less crazy, helped me understand that I couldn't get from her what she didn't have to give, that some people aren't capable of the kind of reflection and accountability I was looking for, that I could choose to have a relationship with her anyway, knowing it would always be on these terms, or I could walk away. She never told me what to do, just helped me see my options clearly. I chose to keep trying. Still, we stayed in touch. It was messy and tense, full of landmines we both pretended not to see, but we showed up. We argued over stupid things, politics and sports, and whether I was raising my daughter right, whether she watched too much TV or not enough, whether I was too strict or not strict enough. She had opinions about everything, and the certainty of someone who'd never had to question herself. We took family trips, short weekend things where we'd drive somewhere neutral and spend 48 hours in forced proximity. A cabin in the mountains once, a beach town another time. We'd cook together, or she'd cook and I'd watch, and we'd fall into old patterns that felt comfortable and suffocating at the same time. We even traveled overseas together for 3 weeks once, just the 2 of us, backpacking through Italy like we were people who knew how to be around each other. Florence, Rome, Venice, the Amalfi Coast. We saw beautiful things. We took pictures. We had moments where I'd forget everything and just enjoy being with her, eating gelato and watching the sunset over the Mediterranean. And then she'd say something cutting, something that felt designed to hurt. And I'd remember why I'd spent 20 years trying to forget her. Somehow we survived it. It wasn't healthy, but it existed. And for a while, existing felt like enough. Then last summer, I invited her to visit me. There was a band she loved when I was a kid, one she used to play constantly on weekend mornings while she made breakfast in better times before everything fell apart. The Indigo Girls. I grew up hearing Closer to Fine drift through our old house, and despite everything, that music had stayed with me, woven into my good memories, the few I had. They were touring near my city, playing an outdoor amphitheater about 30 minutes from my my house, and when I saw the dates, I thought maybe this could be something good, something simple, a shared memory that didn't hurt. Oh, music as a bridge between us, the way it had been before. I called her in June. They're playing here in August, I said, trying to sound casual. You want to come up for it? She said yes immediately, almost too quickly, and I felt something warm flicker in my chest. Hope, maybe, or just the desire for hope, the willingness to believe that maybe this time would be different. We made a plan. She'd fly in on a Wednesday afternoon, the 15th. I'd pick her up from the airport. We'd have dinner at this Italian place she liked, settle in. Thursday night, we'd go to the concert. Friday morning, she'd fly out to visit my sisters on the East Coast, a trip she'd been planning for months, some kind of reconciliation attempt I wasn't privy to the details of. And Saturday morning, early, I'd leave for a work retreat I'd committed to back in March, a long weekend training thing up in the mountains, some leadership seminar my boss had insisted would be good for my career. Clean, clear, no overlap, no extended stay. She agreed to everything. I even sent her a text with the dates clearly laid out, so there'd be no confusion. When she arrived that Wednesday in August, stepping off the escalator at baggage claim with a single rolling suitcase and a backpack, wearing a floral print shirt I'd never seen before, she casually mentioned she'd only bought a one-way ticket. I remember my stomach dropping a little when she said it, this small, sharp feeling like missing a step in the dark. We were walking toward my car, her suitcase wheels clicking on the concrete behind us. What do you mean, one way? I asked. Trying to keep my voice light, trying not to let her hear the alarm bells already ringing in my head. Oh, I figured I'd just book the flight out later, she said, waving her hand dismissively like it was nothing. Easier that way, more flexible. I asked her when her flight out was. She said she'd book it that night, from my house, no problem. I said okay, but something in me had already started to tense up, some old familiar warning system coming online, the one I'd developed as a kid to sense when things were about to go sideways. I reminded myself to breathe, to not assume the worst, to give her the benefit of the doubt. That night at dinner, I brought it up again. Did you book your flight for Friday? I'll do it tonight when we get home, she said, twirling pasta on her fork. Okay, I said. Just remember, I'm leaving Saturday morning super early, like 5 a.m. I know, she said, but something in her tone made me doubt she was really hearing me. Thursday was fine. We walked around downtown, got coffee at this place that made pour-overs and had exposed brick walls, avoided talking about anything important. I showed her the neighborhood, pointing out places I liked, the park where I took my daughter, the library with the good kids section. We got lunch at a food truck, tacos that dripped juice down our hands. That night, we drove to the amphitheater, getting there early to find parking and buy overpriced beers in plastic cups. The show was good. We sang along to songs I hadn't heard in years, songs that took me back to being 8 years old in our kitchen before everything went wrong. She knew every word. She closed her eyes sometimes when she sang, swaying a little, and she looked happy in a way I rarely saw. We took pictures, standing close together with the stage lights behind us, her arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling, pretending everything was normal. For a few hours, it almost felt like it was, like we were just a mother and son enjoying a concert together, like that was all we'd ever been. Friday morning, I woke up early. My flight wasn't until Saturday, but I needed to pack, to prep, to make sure everything was in order. I like to be organized, lists and schedules, a habit I'd developed in sobriety when everything felt chaotic, and I needed to control what I could. I came downstairs to find her sitting at my kitchen table with her coffee, scrolling through her phone, still in her pajamas, even though it was past 9. Did you book your flight? I asked, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd made, something she'd always done, make too much coffee. A full pot, even when it was just her. She looked up at me. Not yet, Mom. You need to fly out today. That was the plan. She set her phone down. I know. I'm looking at it now. But she wasn't. She was scrolling through Facebook. I could see the blue interface reflected in her glasses. I made breakfast, eggs and toast. I got my daughter ready for her last day of summer camp. I came back an hour later after dropping her off, and my mom was still at the table, still in her pajamas, coffee cup empty. So, she said, in this casual tone that made my skin prickle, made every nerve ending stand at attention. I haven't bought my ticket yet. I stared at her. She explained that prices had gone up. Oh, she'd waited too long, apparently, though I'd been reminding her for 2 days, and now everything was expensive, $300 more than she'd expected. And besides, she said, leaning back in her chair like she was about to propose something totally reasonable, instead of flying out to see my sisters, maybe it made more sense to just stay a few extra days, here, at my place. While I was gone, she could watch my daughter, she offered. Even though my daughter had camp and a babysitter already arranged, she could water my plants, she could just relax. I felt something snap inside me, not loud but clean, like a thread finally giving way after being pulled taut for too long. I'm leaving at 5 a.m. tomorrow, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised me, calm in a way that felt dangerous. You need to get on a plane today. But the prices, I'll pay the difference, I said. I don't care about the money, but you can't stay here while I'm gone. Her face changed. Something hardened in her expression. Why not? Because I'm not comfortable with anyone staying in my home when I'm not here. Anyone? She laughed, this short, bitter sound that felt like a slap. I'm not anyone. I'm your mother. I know who you are. I gave birth to you. I raised you. The irony of that statement, given everything, nearly made me laugh. But I didn't. I know, I said, but I'm telling you no. The argument climbed from there, escalating in the way arguments with her always did, 0 to 60 in seconds. Her voice got louder. She stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. She said I didn't didn't trust her. But she said I was being unreasonable. She said she'd stayed at my sister's houses before. What was the difference? I said the difference was my sisters had agreed to it. I hadn't. I told her again, as clearly as I could, that I didn't want anyone, not friends, not family, not anyone, staying in my house when I wasn't there. It wasn't personal. It was a boundary, a line I was drawing. This is ridiculous, she said, her face flushed, her hands gesturing wildly. I'm not some stranger off the street. You're not staying here, I said. We went in circles for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, maybe 30. The same points, over and over. My chest got tighter. My hands started shaking. I shoved them in my pockets so she wouldn't see. I could feel myself getting pulled into something familiar. This old pattern where eventually I'd give in because it was easier than holding my ground. Easier than dealing with her anger and disappointment and the guilt she knew exactly how to wield. But I didn't want to do that anymore. I'd spent 6 years in recovery learning to set boundaries. Learning that no was a complete sentence. Learning that I didn't owe anyone access to my space, my time, my life, just because they'd given birth to me. Finally, after we'd both said everything twice and the air in my kitchen felt thick and suffocating, she crossed her arms and said, "Fine, take me to the airport." There was something in her tone, like this was a bluff, like she was testing me, the way she'd tested me my whole life, pushing to see where I'd break, like she expected me to back down, to apologize, to say, "Wait, no, let's figure this out," to offer some compromise that would end with her getting what she wanted, the way I always had before. I didn't. I went upstairs and packed her things. Her suitcase was still mostly packed from the flight in, which felt telling somehow, like she'd known this might happen, or like she'd planned it. I brought it down and set it by the front door with a thud that felt final. Then I grabbed my keys, put on my shoes, and went to get my daughter from camp early. I buckled her into her car seat, loaded the suitcase into the trunk, and got behind the wheel. My mom stood in the driveway for a long moment, staring at me through the windshield, her arms still crossed. The sun was bright behind her, making her a silhouette. Then she got in. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she was giving me every chance to change my mind. I didn't change my mind. The entire drive to the airport was silent. No music, no small talk, just the sound of the road and my heartbeat in my ears and my daughter humming quietly in the back seat. Some song from camp, oblivious to the tension filling the car like smoke. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands at 10 and 2, and I didn't let myself think about what I was doing because if I thought about it too hard, if I really considered the magnitude of this moment, I might stop. I might pull over. I might apologize. But I didn't want to apologize. I hadn't done anything wrong. When we pulled up to the departure curb at the airport, she didn't move right away. She just sat there, staring straight ahead through the windshield at the glass doors and the people moving through them with their luggage and their plans. At nothing and everything, waiting, still testing, still believing, maybe, that I'd crack. I got out, opened the trunk. The August air was hot and thick, the smell of jet fuel and exhaust. Took her suitcase out and set it on the curb next to her door with a thunk. I walked around to her window and tapped on it. She rolled it down, slowly, her jaw set. "If you can't find a ticket," I said, my voice steady but quiet, "call me. I can help you get a hotel." She stared at me for a long moment. Her eyes were hard, angry, but there was something else there too. Hurt, maybe, or shock that I'd actually followed through. Then she opened the door, stepped out with a heaviness that made her seem older than she was, and slammed it hard enough to make my daughter jump and stop humming. "It's okay, sweetie," I heard myself say, but my voice strange and distant in my own ears. I got back in the driver's seat, put the car in drive. My foot on the brake felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and then I lifted it and I drove away. I watched her in the rearview mirror, standing there on the curb with her suitcase beside her, her hand shading her eyes against the sun, getting smaller and smaller until I turned the corner and she disappeared from view. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the wheel tighter to keep the car steady. My daughter asked me why Grandma looked so mad. I met her eyes in the rearview mirror, those big, innocent eyes that still believed the world was basically good and people basically kind. Grandma needed to go catch her plane, I told her, my voice somehow calm. She accepted this without question, the way kids do, and went back to humming her camp song. I didn't cry until I got home, and then I cried for an hour, sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, ugly crying, the kind that makes your whole body shake, grieving something I couldn't quite name. The texts started that night, not from her at first, but from my older sister. 3 messages in a row. What the hell happened? Mom's saying you abandoned her at the airport? She's really upset. What did you do? I tried to explain. I wrote out a long text, then deleted it. Wrote another one, sent it. It didn't come out right. Everything I said sounded defensive, cold, like I was making excuses instead of explaining what had actually happened. My sister said I should have just let her stay. I said it was my house and my boundary. She said Mom was old and I was being cruel. But I said I'd offered to pay for a hotel. She said that wasn't the point. I stopped responding because I realized I couldn't make her understand, and I was too tired to try. My mom texted me the next day, Saturday morning, while I was at my retreat trying to focus on team-building exercises and leadership modules. Short, clipped messages that came through one after another. Got a hotel, 10 minutes later. Flying out Monday, an hour later. Hope you're happy. I wasn't happy. I was exhausted and guilty and furious all at once. This awful cocktail of emotions that made it hard to breathe, hard to concentrate, hard to to do anything but stare at my phone and wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. I went through the motions of the work retreat. I sat through presentations about communication strategies and conflict resolution. The irony not lost on me. I nodded in the right places. I participated in group discussions. I felt like I was watching my life from outside my body, like I was floating somewhere near the ceiling looking down at this person who looked like me but didn't feel like me. When I got back Sunday night, I found out she'd been telling people her version of events. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly texting me. Friends of hers I'd met once or twice were commenting on her Facebook posts that I'd kicked her out over nothing, that she'd just wanted to spend time with me and I'd thrown her out like garbage, that she'd raised me and this was how I repaid her. She left out the part about refusing to leave when asked. She left out the part about trying to stay in my house without permission. About ignoring every boundary I'd tried to set. In her version, I was the villain and she was the victim, and it was a story she knew how to tell because she'd been telling versions of it for years, decades, my entire life. My sisters believed her at first, both of them. I watched the family group chat light up with messages I wasn't included in, screenshots people sent me later. But then my younger sister, the one who'd actually maintained some kind of relationship with both of us, the one who'd tried harder than anyone to keep our broken family together, called me 3 days later. "Tell me what really happened," she said. Not accusing, just asking. So I did. All of it. The one-way ticket, the delayed booking, the refusal to leave, the boundary I'd set over and over that kept getting ignored. Yet she was quiet for a long time after I finished. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could hear her kids playing in the background, normal life continuing while ours fell apart. "She did the same thing to me," she finally said, her voice small. 2 years ago. Showed up for a weekend, said she'd stay a few days, ended up staying 2 weeks. I couldn't get her to leave. Every time I brought up her flight, she'd change the subject or get upset or find some reason she needed to stay longer. She left when she was ready, not when I asked her to. That's when I realized this wasn't new. This was a pattern, a trap she'd laid before and would probably lay again, testing boundaries, pushing limits, seeing how far she could go before someone pushed back hard enough to stop her. Over the next few months, more came out. But my older sister, the one who'd been angry at me, who'd initially sided with our mom, finally admitted in a late-night phone call that mom had tried something similar with her years ago, before they'd stopped speaking. Little manipulations, little tests, little ways of seeing how far she could push before someone snapped. Extended visits that became weeks. Borrowed money that was never repaid. Promises made and broken. Boundaries stated and ignored. A pattern of behavior that went back years, maybe decades, that we'd all experienced but never talked about because we'd each thought we were the only one, that we were the problem, that if we'd just been better kids or better adults, or more patient or more understanding, she wouldn't have needed to manipulate us. The evidence, if you can call it that, came in the form of screenshots. As my younger sister, ever the documentarian, found old text threads where mom had tried to extend visits, had forgotten to book return flights, had gradually encroached on boundaries until someone snapped. She sent them to me in a long message with the texts attached. It was all there, this pattern of behavior spanning years, and seeing it laid out in blue and gray message bubbles made something in me settle. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't the villain in her story. I'd just been the first one in a long time to actually hold the line instead of bending until I broke. My therapist helped me process it all. Dr. Chen, in her office with the comfortable chairs and the box of tissues that was always full, helped me see that what I'd done wasn't abandonment. It was self-preservation. That boundaries aren't cruelty. That saying no doesn't make you a bad son. That I'd given her multiple chances, multiple warnings, multiple opportunities to respect what I'd asked for, and she'd chosen not to. "You didn't leave her with nothing," Dr. Chen said during one session. "You offered her options. A hotel, help booking a flight. What she wanted was control, and when you wouldn't give her that, she chose to see it as abandonment. But you didn't abandon her. You protected yourself." My relationship with my mom has been non-existent since then. She sent a birthday text in November, just happy birthday, with a cake emoji. I looked at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, trying to figure out what to say. In the end, I didn't respond. She tried calling it Christmas. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once, her voice cheerful and fake, wishing me happy holidays, saying she hoped we could talk soon. I deleted it. My sisters and I have grown closer, bonded by the shared understanding of what it's like to be her child, to love someone who sees boundaries as betrayal, and who rewrites history to suit whatever narrative makes her the victim. We have a group chat now, just the three of us, where we talk about our kids and our lives, and sometimes, carefully, about her, about the patterns we're trying not to repeat, about the therapy we're all in, about how hard it is to be a parent when you're trying to figure out what healthy parenting looks like from scratch. I think about that day sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep, the sound of her door slamming, the image of her in my rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until she was just a dot, then nothing. At the weight of my daughter's question hanging in the air, the way my hands shook, the way I cried afterward, alone in my kitchen, grieving not for the relationship I'd lost, but for the one I'd never had, the mother I'd needed and never got. I don't regret it exactly, but it still sits heavy. Maybe it always will. Maybe that's just the cost of choosing yourself when you've spent a lifetime choosing everyone else. When you've been taught that your needs don't matter as much as other people's comfort. When setting a boundary feels like building a wall. My daughter is older now. She doesn't ask about grandma anymore. The absence has become normal, the way absences do when you're young and adaptable. I don't know what I'll tell her when she's old enough to understand. When she asks why we don't see her. Why she doesn't have a grandmother on my side of the family the way she has one on her mother's side. Maybe I'll tell her the truth. Maybe I'll tell her that sometimes love isn't enough. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is drive away. That protecting yourself doesn't make you selfish or cruel. It just makes you human. I'm still sober. Still going to meetings. Still working my program. Still calling Marcus when things get hard. Still going to therapy every other week. Still working on being the kind of person who can set a boundary and live with it. Who can say no without apologizing. Who can choose himself without drowning in guilt afterward. It's harder than I thought it would be. But it's better than the alternative, which is drowning in whiskey and regret and the weight of everyone else's expectation. You know, I'm trying to be a better father than I had parents. Trying to give my daughter the stability I never had. The safety I never felt. The certainty that she's loved unconditionally. And that love doesn't come with strings or tests or traps. She'll never read "I have no son" on any paperwork with her name on it. That cycle ends with me. If anything else happens, I might update. But for now, this is where we are. Her on one side of the country, me on the other. Sisters who finally understand each other. A daughter who's learning what healthy boundaries look like. A life I'm building from scratch. One sober day at a time. One boundary at a time. One decision at a time. To choose myself even when it hurts. If you read all this, thanks. It means more than you know. Yes, sometimes you just need to tell your story to strangers who'll never know your name. Just to prove to yourself that it happened. That it was real. That you survived it.